Welcome back to third part of selections in 3D Studio Max. In this video, I want to talk about soft selection in 3D Studio Max. But before starting, I want to mention about two things left in previous section. First of all, I want to mention about keyboard shortcut of loop and ring selection. However, I mentioned in edge, ring and loop selection with buttons and double click. Also, if you press Alt or Option L, you could make loop selection, and if you press Alt or Option R, it is ring selection. Also, if you remember, I talked about ignore back facing. Allow me to delete top part of this sphere. If you remember, I mentioned if you enable ignore back facing option and start dragging, any faces revealed in viewport normal direction will select it and back face will ignore it. But that doesn't mean if you don't see any faces, it won't select it. For example, I apply shell modifier to this hemisphere and collapse it to Editable Poly again, enabling polygon in selection type and activate ignore back facing. Again, if I start dragging to selection, as you see, the back face, it didn't select it, but inner side selected, because while I was dragging, both normal directions was in my viewport aligned. So note that ignore back facing does not mean if you don't see any surfaces, it won't select it. Anyway, let's work on soft selection. I create a plane here and collapse it to Editable Poly. Press Ctrl or Command M for a couple of times to increase subdivisions. In any selection type like vertices or edges or polygon, we have soft selection option. For example, here I select one vertex, open soft selection rollout. As you see, by default, use soft selection is disabled. I zooming in a bit. Note that when we don't use soft selection, we have absolute selection, which I mean red is fully or 100% selected and blue is mean nothing selected. But when you're enabling use of selection, now we have range of selection between fully selection to non-selection. Alright, for example, I move this vertex up. As you see, now we transformed our vertices based on fall off soft smooth selection. Allow me to undo that. Fall off is the radius of selection. Here we have sample diagram of preview of your selection, which it is mean your selection will react exactly like this diagram. If I move up, by default, it is very similar to my diagram graph. Pinch will accelerate your deselection, or better to say decay selection. And again, as you see, it is very similar to your diagram. And the bubble will work exactly opposite of pinch, which I mean your selection decay will decrease slowly. Alright. By default, edge distance is not enabled. However, in this plane it doesn't any specific changes except your selection shape. But when I create, for example, a narrow box and increasing subdivision for width and height, collapse it to editable poly again, select vertex and enable soft selection. By default, as you see, in front side and back side both affected, because by default distance of your current default selection doesn't matter, which means some kind of spherical area will select it. If I start to pushing or dragging, backside will affect it too. I undo that. But if I enable edge distance and increase the value, also it works with follow. This time, as you see, the backside it didn't select it, because selection algorithm will work based on your current selection and the normals connected to your current position based on distance, which it is very useful when you have curved or organic or soft shelled objects like my current geometry. Shaded face toggle, it's only preview of your selection with different color. Alright, I click on that again to go back default preview. Sometimes you need some part of soft selection, for example this area, and add other regions but without any soft selection. To do that, after you chosen your soft selected area, you could enable lock soft selection. Now if I press Ctrl or Command key down and start to selecting other regions, as you see, my new selection added without any soft selection, which it is useful in some cases. Also, we have paint, blur and revert selection based on paint soft selection, which it is works like other painting options in 3D Studio Max, like paint deformation, which I provided different video about that. So I could enable paint button and start painting. By enabling blur button, you could make softer selection, especially in edges, and revert will reduce your selection. We have selection value. By default it is 1. Allow me to deselect everything. By default, when you have value 1, when you start painting, the middle internal part will select it 100% or is multiply 1 by 100. If I reduce the value, for example 0.5, and start painting, as you see, now your selection is about half value of default selection. And of course brush strength and brush size, which works like other brushes. Also, we have brush options here. You could customize your brush type. For example, this is the inner side of your brush center and this is outer, which we have a linear graph here with a smooth follow. For example, if I select the inner side and set the 0 value and create a new point here and increase the value to 1, now the center of our brush value is 0. Slowly increase to reach 1 and again going to 0. Now if I start to painting, for example, I just single click in this region, as you see, middle part has no selection, slowly increase to reach value 1 and again going to 0. I could do exactly opposite. Allow me to remove that and select the outer part and set 1. Now if I start to painting, as you see, it started from 0 to reach 1. I think I forgot to set the selection value to 1. That's why it wasn't fully selected. Alright. Now we have from 0 to 1. Of course, you could again use blur button. However, blur also works with exactly same parameter of paintbrush. So allow me to set the value by default and 1. Now I could make my selections soft, and that's it. Of course, some modifiers will work with your current selection. For example, if I start to create some selection and apply some modifiers like push modifier, as you see, this modifier works with your current selection. I could go back to Editable Poly in Modifier stack and adjust my soft selection. Allow me to enable show end result, and as you see, it is dynamically works fine. Even I could add to my selection and using blur to make soften. Or even apply other modifiers, works similar to push with current selection. For example, I could apply F50 modifier and select all control points and pushing up or down. Even I could scale them and rotating. Or even apply something like twist modifier. As you see, preview gizmo only apply to current selection. That's it. Thanks for watching. In next video, I want to talk about selection in Editable Poly with using ribbon selection part, which is very useful and helping you to select randomly based on edge count, mirror, select similar or much more options. See you in next video.